Welcome to the module on Global Political Economy and the TNCs. The backdrop of this particular discussion on the intervention of the TNCs in the global economy goes back to the 19th century when the companies want to expand their business operations outside their home country. This was basically driven by a lot of external factors which have motivated these TNCs to operate. More importantly, the trade liberalization measures which have come up. This basically brings in the concept of the free trade, whereby the countries can export or import without paying any kind of trade litigations. The financial markets across the globe also have expanded. This has also contributed to this upcoming of the TNCs. The technologies which have spread out in terms of telecommunications, business and communications also have been responsible for the spread of the TNCs over time. So it has been seen that TNCs have become the more global players in the economy, which are accounting for the world trade, investment and employment. So any kind of transnational company which operates on the world trade, operates on the investment projections, operates on the employment projections also play an important role. So what are these TNCs? So these TNCs have the revenues and the assets that are exceeding the GDP and the budget of the small and the medium enterprises, and as a result of that, they have a tremendous impact on the national, social and environmental standards of an economy. So this also calls for a kind of a caution against the national sovereignty, but however the TNCs have come up in a major role across the globe. This basically refers to the introductory inputs on the advent of the TNCs across the globe and how it gets a place in the global political dynamics of a nation. First of all, it has been seen that in the post-Second World War era, TNCs are the organizations which are operating in multiple countries and they have enjoying significant economic and political power. This had been because of the rise in the capitalism across the globe, which has come up by these dominant classes, and they are basically being triggered with the growth of these transnational corporations or the TNCs. So TNCs have become a significant force in the global economy and they operate in the economic activities including the manufacturing, services and resource extraction. Resource extraction also refers to the land as well as to the labor, because TNCs are in search of the nations where there is a huge pool of labor so that the cost effectiveness can be enjoyed by these TNCs. Moreover, it has been seen that the growth of the TNCs has been attributed to different factors like advancement in transportation and communication technology, the trade policies, the liberalization of the economic regulations. That is also very important for having a flexible labor law and how these TNCs can come up in a bigger shape. So it has been seen that these TNCs are becoming truly global in scope. There are kind of the several key industries are there like the electronics, automobile manufacturing and the petroleum, because these are the major areas where they go for extraction of the natural resources of the country, and that is how the TNCs want to work on. Moreover, we can see that the transportation and the communication technology which has come up with the TNCs made it more easier for them to operate in the multiple nations, because they have taken up mostly dependent upon the foreign investments. So thereby with the given trade policies, with the investment regulations, it has become easier for the TNCs to invest and operate in the foreign markets. It has been seen with the global political economy, that is a field of study, that examines the relationship between the politics and economies on a global scale. Because any kind of global political economy, as it is said by GPE, wants to bring a kind of a synergy between two important domains. One is the domain of politics, another is the domain of economics, and how these two are operative on a global scale. So basically it takes up for shaping the political and the economic factors to get the global economic outcomes. So these global economic outcomes can be reflected with more and more emergence of TNCs. It can also be reflected in more and more the emergence of superpowers or the transition in this regard. So what are these TNCs? They are operating in the multiple countries, they are engaging in the various activities, and thereby they are also cultivating in all this arena. So that makes TNCs to be more and more operative and successful in this particular domain. Now we move on to the role of TNCs in the global political economy. This is basically taken up about the role that the TNCs wish to perform. Firstly, the TNCs operate in a complex and a dynamic environment that is shaped by the interactions with the state. So hereby comes the role of the domestic government or the domestic economy in use. Because whenever the TNCs are operating in any country, it is the complex and the dynamic environment they are looking into. So any kind of dynamic environment calls for all the transitional factors that are in process. And complex in the sense, some complicated mechanisms come up, which is shaped by the interactions of the state. So when we talk about interactions of the state, it calls for the state policy, the political environment of the state, and how the domestic government can have a kind of a consensus with the objectives of the TNCs, so that there can be a mutual beneficial outcome for both of them. The state, on the other hand, has the power to regulate and tax, because this is basically one of the monitoring mechanism that the state should perform. That is the mechanism of regulation and the mechanism of taxing. TNCs enforce labor and environmental standards and promote social and economic development, because TNCs will be on the ground of labor and environmental standards. That is very important for the TNCs to come up and promote social and economic development, because they are also looking after the generation of the livelihoods and an overall social transformation in terms of various kind of demand and supply factors. TNCs also interact with the global governance system. So when we talk about the TNC, then the global and the governance system operates together. A global system operates which is driven by the technology, and the governance systems call for a political economic structure, which includes international organizations, whereby we take about the International Monetary Fund or World Bank or World Trade Organization. All of them are linked up with various kind of operational practices of these transnational corporations or TNCs. TNCs also are very much proactive in the development of the global rules, because whenever they are talking about the cross-border financial flows, then definitely the trade, the investment, and the intellectual property rights need to be governed by the TNCs. So thereby some guidelines, some setting rules must be there in this regard. TNCs also play an important role in the international financial system. So when we talk about the international financial system, we mainly refer to the agents of international finance, whereby the financial markets come in. Also the interactions with the World Bank and the IMF plays an important role, and that is how the TNCs operate on. TNCs also have the power to influence the financial market outcomes. So when we talk about the financial market outcomes, we talk about the exchange rates and the interest rates, because these are the two very sensitive economic or macroeconomic indicators that are highly exposed to the volatility. So the TNCs have to come up with proper policies of the financial institutions so that the economic stability and the developmental objectives cannot be hampered. So TNCs also plays an important role in maintaining a balancing act. It has also come up with a kind of an acquisition or a kind of a negativity against this propaganda of the TNCs, because the power to influence the financial institutions so that they can benefit more than the host country. So this is one of the pessimistic view regarding the operational capacity or operational procedures of the TNCs, whereby the economic power is being accused of to influence the financial institutions and to benefit the interests at the expense of the broader social and economic objectives. So that makes TNCs to come up in a bigger shape. So thereby we can see that TNCs are operating in a large scale in that regard. Now we move on to the impact of the TNCs on the global political economy. So apart from the role or the idealistic functions, what had been the impact in this domain? Firstly, the TNCs have both positive and negative impacts in this regard. Particularly in terms of the positive impact, they have a crucial role in instrumenting the international trade, because international trade brings in lots of activities through exchange of goods and services, which TNCs are working on. Foreign investments are very much needed whenever the domestic investment falls short, or it can be used in a symbiosis with the domestic investment. Production and distribution of goods and services are also taken up by the TNCs. Because when we talk about the production and the distributional sector, then TNCs plays an important role in motivating them. TNCs also create certain job opportunities, because thereby in the host country they require to set up an affiliate, and thereby it requires job creation. Definitely results to rise in the skill formation, which calls for higher productivity and economic growth. So with this advent of the TNCs, we have seen that the modern technology has to come up, keeping in view the dynamism of the entire world. Training and employment opportunities to emerge, because this calls for skill formation and expertise training, and also to merge up with the local communities. This is basically a kind of a mixing with the cultures or with the local cultures and the local systems. So any kind of increase in the skill, knowledge, improve in the working conditions, job creations, all these are inherent within the dynamics of the TNC. So these TNCs are basically geared up to promote economic growth, and today, more importantly, within the global political economy, they're also to ensure peace and prosperity. And that is how they can come up for the local communities. So the terms prosperity along with the peace are also taken up within the paradigm of the political structure, whereby the TNCs can play an important role in that regard. Moreover, TNCs also have some kind of cautions from the objective of the domestic government. One of the cautions in terms of the social impact. So when we refer to any country which is labor surplus, or which there is a huge land taken up by the population, it has been seen that the TNCs result to displacement of the labor. That is how the local industries are displaced, and thereby the cultures and the ways of life are also getting shattered or affected. So this may lead to social tensions, which thereby bring some kind of opposition or resistance against the new ideas which are created, or new ways of living that are coming up. Some kind of conflicts also arise, and as a result of that, the life gets threatened. So this is basically calling for a proper civic order, or a good political structure, or a good federal system to develop to combat these issues. TNCs also have some issues in violation of human rights, particularly in developing countries where regulations are less stringent. Because in developing countries, they actually target the labor surplus economies where the laborers have no bargaining power. And as a result of that, their possibility of getting exploited are on the rise. And that is what the TNCs add in their comparative advantage, that by exploiting the cheap labor, engaging in the human trafficking, and in most of the cases violating the workers' rights. So this is one of the kind of a pessimistic view or a perception if the TNCs are coming up large in numbers and they dominate the domestic economic projections or the domestic economic environment. TNCs also have some kind of issues related to environmental degradation, because in most of the cases they come up with the land acquisition, setting up an industrial affiliate which creates environmental hazards in terms of deforestation or in terms of pollution, and thereby affects the climate change. So any kind of disorders in the entire effect of the climate change, in the release of the greenhouse gases, also has come up with the role of the TNCs. So basically the depletion of the natural resources like water, minerals, all of them have affected the livelihoods of the nation. All of them have played a pivotal role in displacing the labor from their land, and these are basically prohibiting the human rights. So these are basically inherent within the structure of the TNCs. Particularly in the developing nations, it has been seen that the TNCs are more attracted to those countries where the environmental laws are less stringent or rather flexible, because these are one of the arenas where they don't have to compromise with their set of production structure. So as a result of that, environmental problems can lead to a long-term damage, the public health and the local economies will be affected. In that case, a global political economic structure comes in. So a political economic structure calls for a proactive and an effective government and a civil society. They should be made accountable for their actions, particularly in the implementations, in the enforcement of the regulations, to protect the human rights so that environment gets protected. This also calls for the TNCs that they should operate in an ethical and sustainable manner. So when we talk about the ethical and the sustainable manner, basically we consider the welfare of the stakeholders, because this welfare of the stakeholders are taken up for the welfare of the society. So this requires a concerted effort from the governments, civil society organizations and private sector to regulate the TNC's activities and hold them accountable for their actions. So whenever we look at a kind of a concerted effort, so this concerted effort comes up from the government's point of view, from the civil society's organizational point of view, and also from the private sector's initiative, how they can come up in a concerted or in a combined manner. So then only the TNCs can aim for sustainable development, can aim for faster processing of the global economy, and can take up the regulations or the activities in shape. The regulation of the TNCs. The functioning of the TNCs in a global platform calls for a structured and a kind of a properly regulated mechanism. So TNCs basically operate across the borders, which significantly affect the economic and the political environment. But these organizations are mostly criticized when they have the motive for orienting the business cultures. That means pro-business has been more of the profit maximizing nature of these TNCs. And by this, they are compromising the workers' rights and the environmental issues. Basically, in making the profit motives, the workers' rights in most of the cases gets violated and environmental degradation comes up as a consequence. So basically the TNCs are regulated by a complex system which is basically complicated, taking care of the three important arenas like the national, regional and international laws, and which vary or diverse in a wide range of issues. Also includes the labor rights, environmental protection comes in, and intellectual property rights also taken care of. So what is being seen that the TNCs are operating across the world with a kind of impunity or in a times of a monopolization in their activity process. Moreover, it has been observed that TNCs has the tendency to influence the domestic governments, because the domestic governments are basically shaping up their policies along with the TNCs, where the TNCs dominate them to shape up in their own interest. And as a result of that, they have the tendency to evade some of the regulations and making the regulations to be more dilute. Some countries are more willing to regulate TNCs than others because they are likely to operate in a country with weaker regulations and thereby attracting most of the business. There has been a growing movement to hold TNCs accountable for their actions. When I talk about their accountability, this calls for the transparency that the TNCs have, strengthening the labor rights that comes in, and protecting the environment. So these are the three major inputs which have come up in terms of a transparent structure, in terms of the labor rights that needs to be strengthened, and the environmental issues that are coming up. So whenever the TNCs are operating, they're operating for greater international cooperation, regulating with the TNCs more effectively. So basically, whenever we look after a kind of a regulatory framework, we call for a joint effort of the three important stakeholders, namely the government, the civil society, and the private sector, to work together to maintain a regulatory framework for better sustainability, accountability, and protecting the rights of the workers and the environment. That is basically taken up in terms of the TNC's mechanism. TNCs also play an important role in the overall holistic development of the nation. So when I talk about the holistic development of the nation, it is basically driven by the investment. Because investment is the addition to capital stock over the time. And this can be done by directly through the foreign investment, domestic investments, which must act in consensus so that the country can go to a higher trajectory of growth and development. This also deals with the transfer of technology in terms of skill formation, development of industries, and making the industrial development as a pivotal role. This also makes it important for the countries to build up factories, making it more self-sufficient, purchasing the equipment which can be more of quality and which they can import, and definitely with the objective of creation of jobs. So TNCs have the resources to invest in research and development, which is the major issues. New product and technologies are coming up, and thereby the efficiency and the productivity can increase. So whenever we are talking about the efficiency and the productivity, it is the TNCs which matters a lot, because thereby they can go to a higher growth state in terms of global platforms. Moreover, the developing countries have also come up with the objective of transformation in telecommunication, transportation, and healthcare. So TNCs are also very much required to provide the social infrastructure, particularly when the health infrastructure is fragile in most of the developing nations. They can bring in modern know-how as well as technology, which are crucial for the development of the local industries. And as a result, they can play an important role in developing the balance of payment, increasing the foreign exchange earnings, and thereby the developmental paradigm can be improved. The competitiveness of the country can also come up in a better way. Access to global market is also important, and this actually makes clear that TNCs are coming up with the positive issues. However, it's not that all the impact on the development are all positive. There are certain issues which actually refers to the issues of ethics which are there in the TNCs. Because though they may contribute to the development of the many countries, bringing in technology, jobs, healthcare services, and even plays an important role in the correction of the balance of payment, but also it has to be ethical in terms of mixing with the local communities and taking care of the environment. There should not be any kind of erosion of the ethical values or the social value system, and rather they should be united with the concern of the environment. So this calls for a good governmental activity or a governmental support so that all the appropriate policies and the regulations must be in place so that the negative impact can be minimized and the positive impacts can be maximized. Then only the TNCs can have a balancing act altogether. This also calls for the impact of the TNCs on the development. Similarly, the impact on the growth also it goes on the development in terms of the tax revenue generation, technological transfer, and definitely the provision of employment. It also facilitates the flow of capital and technology, which actually leads to more competitiveness in the global market, because global market should be more competitive rather than believing on the dominance of the TNCs, making it to a monopolization. So this competitiveness has to be inbuilt or injected within the global platform. Moreover, it has been seen that to ensure productivity, efficiency, and quality, these TNCs must come up with new production techniques. So these new production techniques are very much inevitable in this regard, and thereby we can go for more productivity, efficiency and equity. Thirdly, we can see that whenever we are referring to the TNCs, there should be sustainable development practices. So sustainable development practices means any kind of practices which takes care of the community, takes care of the environment, so that they are ensured that they have also some kind of social responsibility, and so that they can also contribute to the local community and the developmental projects. So this is also inherent within the structure of the TNCs. And thereby the TNCs also can have a pivotal role. But nevertheless, there is certain impact of the TNCs which raises some caution. For example, the exploitation of resources and the depletion of environment, definitely in terms of environmental degradation and pollution. So this actually brings in the focus that some kind of social responsibility is embedded within the structure of these TNCs. Moreover, it has been seen that since they target those nations where the labor laws are less stringent, there is a tendency of paying low wage to the workers, which refers to the overutilization, but they are underpaid. So as a result of that, instability can come up, and this also will be referring a kind of a domination of the local markets. Because the negative impact is that the local industries which come up with some new ideas and innovations, they're suppressed by most of these TNCs. So as a result of this kind of domination, displacement occurs of the local business, job losses are inevitable, and economic stagnation also crops in. So economic stagnation is basically a kind of a plateau structure of an economic growth, whereby because of this plateau it is seen displacement of this local business or the structures come up. So local industries get crowded out with this advent of this FDI or foreign investments through the TNCs. So in terms of the role in the development, one of the strong criticism that comes in is basically the profit maximization, which is basically being overshooting any kind of social regards. Moreover, in terms of environmental issues, they are basically taken up in terms of practicing some unsustainable practices, which leads to deforestation, pollution, and they are ignoring the workers' rights. Human rights violations are also taken up, and also the poor working conditions sometimes crop up. So these are the arenas where they should look after in order to make the TNCs a successful vision within the global economic structure. TNCs also operate whenever we have seen that the tax laws are very much less stringent or flexible. So there is a tendency to evade the taxes, and thereby the host country government will be at loss because they will not be generating any kind of tax revenues. They have also some kind of tendency to exercise their bargaining power and influence the political decisions. This is very much alarming for any host country. So any kind of dominance by the TNCs, by any kind of power that they exercise in the global platform, which can lead to corruption and political instability, particularly social unrest and conflicts. TNC's impact on the local cultures is also a concern. This is because the local cultures gets eroded away because of this. So as a result of that, there can be some kind of unrest, like loss of social cohesion, that is the social collectiveness. Even the identity can be lacking, or there can be some kind of loss of identity in this type of mixing cultures. So thereby the social and the political stability can be hampered because of too much dependence on the TNCs, and the state or the government has a minimal role. Thereby it is said that maximizing the gains of the TNC can be done by minimizing their effects on environment and on the social cultures and the customs. It's not that the TNCs are actually being criticized or they have some strong negative impacts, but they can be actually channelized in an effective or an efficient manner if these following policies or if these following observations can be made regarding their functioning, just for improvement. Firstly, they call for corporate social responsibility. It helps in the promotion of the sustainable development which do not compromise with the environmental resources, impact of the TNCs on the environment, local communities, labor practices, all of them have to be taken care of. Secondly, we have the regulation of the TNCs, which means how the global political economy can have a proper regulatory mechanism, how they can develop new approaches to regulate the TNCs through a proper monitoring structure. Because the domestic government should not be crowded out or should not be dominated by their policies. There should be space for both of them to operate in a cohesive manner. This also calls for the power dynamics, because this is regarding the power play that occurs in most of the cases. So power dynamics basically refers how the government decisions are influenced by the TNCs. But here they should not be mixed up because the power dynamics plays an important role. Global economic governance. This calls for managing the impact of the TNCs on the global economy. Like this calls for the World Trade Organization, IMF, and other actors which are there, which regulate the international finance and the global economy. Emerging markets also play an important role in it because the TNCs helps in promoting economic growth, helps in the transfer of technology, and how the emerging markets can come up. So emerging markets in terms of the markets which are basically taking up the future of this economy or of the global political structure. So in these particular discussions, we have seen that the TNCs have transformed the global economy, which has come up with some positive reflections in terms of skill upgradation, job creation, and changing the dynamics of the entire economy as a whole. But at the same time, the economic interdependence between the nations are also to be taken up, because it may lead to disparity in their growth projections. Like there can be more and more class struggle, social unrest and conflict between the developed and the developing, or in terms of less developed or high developed nations. So in the global political economy, TNCs are gaining importance, particularly the international relations, political systems, and the nature of the governance are affected. So thereby, when we talk about international relations, we basically refer to the kind of the treaties or the kind of the trade agreements or the non-trade agreements that are signed, and how this international cohesiveness can be maintained. The governance capital also play an important role in making these TNCs to come up. And particularly the relationship is very complex because it has to take care of the interest of the local economy, then it has to go to the regional level, and then only to the global level. So for reaching up to the global level, there should be proper fundamentals which has to be deep rooted within the nation, so that they can reap the benefits of the positive effects of the TNCs. Otherwise, TNCs can appear to be disrupting their normal standards in terms of job loss or in terms of loss of national sovereignty and loss of cultures. So it is essential for policymakers, for scholars, for practitioners, and mainly for the administrators to make a good bondage between the TNCs and the dynamics of the global political economy. And then only these two can work hand in hand. So that is how the TNCs play a very pivotal role in the transformation of the global economic process, which takes care of the economic, non-economic, and more importantly, the political dynamics.